Hey everybody, Tim Tritch here with Ethernet Blueprint. Welcome back to my video series called Unifi for Newbies. This series has been so well received by all of you guys that I've decided to continue adding content to it so you guys can continue to grow your knowledge and build your networks. Now, this video is a perfect example of that and was requested many times by you guys in the comments, and that is zone-based firewalls. We're going to break this down for you and show you how to use it. So I'm really excited to get this video going, guys. So let's go ahead and get started. If you've used Unifi for any amount of time at all, it becomes apparent very quickly that they like to change things. Now, sometimes these changes are very subtle. They move a menu around or they change some of the verbiage. While other times they introduce completely new features and it feels like they've redone the interface. And I'm sure for a lot of you out there, especially my newbies, that's probably kind of annoying. I mean, you just learn your way around, you're kind of getting a feel for things, and they go and change it on you. However, it is this very thing that is one of my favorite things about Ubiquiti. It's one of the reasons why I continue to promote their products. They remain innovative. They're always trying to think outside the box and bring new features to our home networks. And I really, really like that. And the network upgrade to version 9 was no exception to this, when they introduced zone-based firewalls and the firewall matrix, and we all had to relearn how to do our firewall rules. Which is why I'm sure a lot of you out there who follow my series were probably like, what the hell is this? I mean, I just get my rules set up and now I gotta go change everything? Guys, don't worry, I got your back. Today's video is gonna be 100% dedicated to getting those zone-based firewall rules set up. All right, so I'm gonna kind of go on a limb here and I'm gonna guess that my audience is generally in one of these three categories, okay? So door number one is you have the original firewall rules still in place, the rules that we set up in video 6, and you haven't converted anything, okay? Door number two are for my users who bravely hit that convert to zone-based firewall rules button and left everything as it was because you really didn't know what to do next or how to manipulate it, and you kind of went back to YouTube and started searching on how to use this darn zone-based firewall thing, right? Or door number three is that you really haven't done anything. You haven't created any firewall rules yet. Maybe you just haven't got that part yet, or you knew you had this update in place and you were waiting for a video like this to come along. Whatever your situation is, but you have zero firewall rules in place. Guys, no matter what situation you're in, we are going to cover it today because we're going to kind of start fresh. So for all of you who have put in the firewall rules that we did in video 6, we're actually going to wipe those out. But before you get like, frustrated, right? There's a reason for it. I'm going to show you why I'm doing it that way. And you'll understand why this is the approach. And I promise you, I'm not creating a ton of work for you. It's just something that I think makes this process a little bit easier to understand the zone-based firewalls, which is the whole goal here, guys. I want you to understand this so you can take what you're learning in today's video and use it for your own home unique situations. All right, so to kick things off, I do want to talk about what are zone-based firewalls, right? So I know they look different, but how much different are they really, or they just changed the interface? So let's kind of break this down a little bit, right? So in the old firewall way, right, the normal firewall rules I'm calling them here, those rules were sort of based on a one-to-one rule set or a one-to-one relationship. So the example I have here is this device or this network can talk to that device or that network, right? So there's kind of that one-to-one relationship. And yes, you could have this network can talk to any, right? So that was kind of a one-to-many. However, most times you kind of had to figure out what you wanted to be able to talk to each other and you created a rule, or what you didn't want to talk to each other and you created a rule to block it, right? So you had to sort of think this through. However, zone-based firewalls are a little bit different. So what we do is we're going to take those same networks, those VLANs, and we're going to categorize them into zones or buckets, type of thing, right? And those rules that we create will be based on these zones. So you're going to have more one-to-many or many-to-many or many-to-one type of rules because these zones can encompass multiple VLANs, right? And so the example of this is all of the networks in this zone can talk to all of the networks in this zone, or all of the networks in this zone cannot talk to this one network in this other zone, right? So you sort of start breaking them down in these categories, and then you create your rules accordingly. And it actually does simplify things in a way, but in another way, it's almost exactly the same. You're still going to have some one-to-one rules. I don't know that you're going to get away from that. So it will become more apparent when we get into the actual setup here, but I did want to kind of break that down for you. Okay, so let's go ahead and kick things off. So in video 4, we created some VLANs and some wireless networks, and I have them up here on the screen. And this is kind of our starting point. Now, if you haven't watched the series and you're new to Unifi, I really encourage you to start from the beginning or start from the point where you feel you're comfortable and go through the process. I do break things down for everybody, and I try to explain why we do things certain ways. It's really nice for someone just starting out. So these are the networks we created. We created a default network, which is our main VLAN, VLAN 1, and that's a 192.168.1.1 address. Then we have an IoT network, right? This is where we're going to stick all of our smart devices. We have a camera network. So this is where we're going to stick our Unifi camera devices. And then we have a guest network. And again, very simple. Your needs, you might need an extra network here and there. However, this generally covers, I think, a lot of the populace out there, right? Then, in addition to that, we created some Wi-Fi networks around this. We created a main Wi-Fi network. This is going to be for our main computers and anything that we're going to put in that default network on VLAN 1, and there's the Wi-Fi credentials. Again, guys, don't use these Wi-Fi passwords. These are chosen specifically to make them easy to type for this video. And we have an IoT Wi-Fi network, which is going to be connected to VLAN 2, and then we have a guest Wi-Fi. Now, all of our cameras are physically connected, so we don't need Wi-Fi in that case. However, if you do have some wireless cameras, like a wireless doorbell, you can create a wireless network for your camera network as well. It's just, I'm not doing that in this example. Again, kind of keep things simple and moving along here. All right, so now that we have our starting point, let's talk about how this is supposed to work once we have our zone-based firewall rules in place. Like, what is going to be able to talk to what? Now, for today's video, I'm actually going to build you 3 different scenarios, just tweaking little things in each of those scenarios so you guys can pick the one that closely relates to what you have at your house. Okay, but with each of the scenarios, the general concept of how these VLANs can talk to each other is going to stay the same. So let's talk about it. Now, each one is going to have a guest network. The guest network is only going to have access to the internet. It is not going to have access to any of our internal VLANs, and none of those VLANs will be able to access it. Okay, it's internet only. Now, the beauty of this is we don't really have to do anything for this. We're strictly going to stick it in that hotspot zone, and we're going to let the built-in firewall rules do their thing. We don't even have to create anything for it. So guest is going to be easy. Next, we're going to have our default network. Now, the default network is one we want to protect, right? This is where we do our online banking, where our cell phones are, online gaming, Zoom calls for work, whatever. It's the network we're going to be using all the time. We also want to be able to control our other devices. We want to be able to turn on those smart lights or run the smart panel, whatever. Okay, so the default network is going to have full access to the gateway, the camera network, and the IoT network, okay? Now here's the kicker. As long as the communication originates from the default network, these other networks will be able to respond back. Now that's really important when you're trying to control things, okay? However, they will not be able to directly communicate with this VLAN. We're not going to allow that to happen. Only respond, okay? And that's important. But this is going to allow this devices on your default network to be able to control devices in these other VLANs and be able to get a response, okay? Then we're going to have our IoT and camera network, and they too are going to be fairly isolated. They're going to have access to the internet. They're not going to be able to talk to any other VLANs, but we are going to have to allow them some local access here and there to be able to allow certain functionality to happen. For example, the cameras need to be able to record to their NVR. So we have to open up the doors to be able to allow that to happen, okay? So when it's all said and done, the default network's king. Everything else will be fairly isolated. We'll be able to get responses when we send out things from the default network, just like when we set up our video 6 in the series, but we're going to do it today with zone-based firewalls. So let's talk about each of the scenarios real quick, and then we are actually going to get in this thing and start configuring. All right, so scenario number 1 is for those of you who have a UDM SE, UDM Pro, maybe a UDM Pro Max, or a Cloud Gateway Max with Unifi Protect running on it, which means your cameras, which are going to be sitting in this camera VLAN, need to be able to communicate with the gateway to be able to do the recordings and have Unifi Protect manage those cameras, right? This is going to be part of that limited access we talked about. Now, in addition to being your NVR, the gateway is also going to be handling your DNS. This scenario does not account for having something like a pie hole or something out there handling DNS for the network, right? So for your devices in these zones to be able to get to the internet, they also need to be able to access the gateway to get their DNS responses, okay? Now, when you look at it in a diagram form, this is what it's going to look like. So we have our guest network over here, kind of isolated. Like I said, no lines going to and from it except to the internet. We have our default network's going to sit down here in a zone, and that zone is going to have full access to the gateway zone and full access to where our camera and IoT networks are going to be, okay? And those networks are going to be allowed to return traffic back, just like we talked about. And then in addition to that, the camera and IoT network are going to have limited access to our gateway zone so they can handle those functionalities like DNS and the MVR. But basically, they're going to be internet only when this is all said and done. All right, so we're going to tweak these scenarios just a little bit. So I'm going to go through the other two real quick, and then that way you guys can pick which one closest relates to what you have at your house. Now, scenario number 2 is probably going to be the easiest of the 3 to be able to accommodate with our firewall rules. Now, this is going to be when your gateway device is only handling your DNS, but we've offloaded the cameras. So you have a device like a UNVR, UNVR Pro, if you're using Unifi, maybe a Cloud Gateway Gen 2 Plus, or maybe you have a third-party NVR like a Rail-Link system and your cameras plug into that. Either way, all of that is going to be moved into the camera VLAN. We no longer need our cameras to be able to talk to the gateway to send recordings back and forth. We're going to put that all inside the camera VLAN. Now with scenario number 2, our gateway is still handling our DNS, so we still aren't taking into account any of the pie hole situation. We'll be dealing with that in scenario 3. When we look at it in diagram mode, this is what it looks like, right? So we've shifted the camera NVR down into that camera and IoT network zone down there in the lower right corner. We're still going to limit access, but it's really just going to be limited DNS access only. And then all the other same functionality is going to be in place here. Our guest network is still going to be isolated. The default network is still going to have access to everything and allow return traffic, but we've shifted that MVR functionality down into that network, which is actually going to simplify our rules and make this really, really easy for us. All right, so scenario number 3 is going to be for my Pi-hole fans out there. Now, I don't have a Pi-hole for this, but I do want to show you how I would make the rules for it and give you sort of a hypothetical situation, okay? So our gateway is no longer going to be handling our DNS and is going to simulate you having something like a Pi-hole that is going to do that for you. The Pi-hole device will have an IP address of 192.168.1.55 and will be sitting in our default VLAN, okay? So this is all hypothetical. We're not gonna be able to ping this device, but I wanted to show you how the rules work. And our cameras are going to be remaining in the camera VLAN. So there'll be no need for our cameras to be able to talk to the gateway in this scenario. You might have a fourth scenario where maybe you're using a Pi-hole, but your cameras are still talking up into the gateway because you're recording to your gateway. So you would kind of need to do a hybrid of these scenarios, but I think you'll have enough information today to be able to do that, okay? When you look at scenario number 3 in diagram mode, it looks very similar. However, the leg from our camera and IoT network to our gateway is completely gone, except for the internet one. So instead, now we're going to allow limited access over into our default network area so it can handle those DNS requests and these devices can get to the internet. So that's what we're going to build today, guys. Hopefully one of those scenarios closely relates to what you have at your house. Now it's time to get in the config and actually build these things. And we're going to build each one of them from scratch so you'll be able to see it. If you don't want to watch all the way through, make sure you check the timestamps down below to pick the one that works best for you so you can follow that one. All right, so let's dive into the interface a little bit and show where we're going to start things here. So basically where I am right now would be after the completion of video 6. All of the firewall rules that we set up in video 6 are in place right here. See, allow establish and regulated, block invalid traffic, allow home to any. And so we have all of those rules generally set up right now. And you can see up top here, we have the option to click to upgrade. Now I put myself in this starting position on purpose because I want to show you what I don't like about just hitting the click to upgrade button and then trying to manipulate your rules. Like I mentioned earlier, I think it's simpler if we start all over, and I hope that's kind of portrayed in the video here. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and hit click to upgrade, all right? And I'm gonna show you a couple things here. So we have our rules. We're gonna go ahead and say click to upgrade. It's very, very simple. Kind of gives you a little warning saying, hey, if you do this, the only way to go back is to restore your configuration. So if you're nervous, just let me show you this real quick. You can come over into System, you can come over into Backups, and you can just download a backup. Go ahead and just do Settings Only, hit Download, right? And it's going to take a backup of everything the way you have set right this second, all working, and it's going to save that for you. So I'm just going to go ahead and save one. Just so you know, okay? So now we've done that. We've covered our bases, because if we goof up or we don't want to, keep going, I can restore right to how it was right now, okay? So I'm going to go back into security. And we're going to go ahead and say click to upgrade, and I'm going to say upgrade. Now, it doesn't take very long. It's a very, very quick process of doing this. And when it's done, you can see how fast it is. It has created our default zone firewall setup, right? And it has taken a lot of the rules that we set up in the first one. It's taken those and converted them into this zone-based firewall matrix, right? And this is a really nice way of doing it. If you watch any YouTube videos out there, a lot of what they talk about is, oh, this is so easy to see your rules. And I definitely think it's an improvement. It does make it easier to kind of know where to go. However, just looking at this by itself, you still have to click into each one of these to see, what the rules are and everything. So in general, it is easier, but there's still a lot of clicking around, right? At least you're kind of in the right place, which is great. There's no LAN in, LAN out, LAN local, none of that stuff anymore as part of this, right? And I'm going to show you what this is like. All right, so by default, what it does is it puts all of your networks, default IoT and camera, in the internal zone, right? A pre-built internal zone that we can't change. We can't change the name of it or anything. And it puts our guest network in the hotspot. Hotspot meaning zone. The hotspot zone is your guest zone, okay? Gateway is the gateway. And then you have your external, which is going to be your WAN interface and allowing traffic from the internet in. Now, we're not going to do any of that as part of today's video. I didn't do that in video 6, so it's just not really part of this series. But if you have VPNs and things like that, you may have to manipulate some of those rules at some point, okay? Now, let me just go in here. If I go view all policies, now rules are called policies, okay? This is a policy-based firewall, and I uncheck everything except custom. Custom means ones we put in. Those 6, I had 8 rules in. If you recall, in the last screen, I had 8 rules in, and now I have like 20. 20 rules I would have to manipulate to try and make things work, because it put everything in that internal zone and it's trying to make sure it can talk to this zone and that zone and this zone and that zone. It's creating all those one-to-one relationships between all the different built-in zones. Now, I don't love that. I think it's hard. If I wanted to go change a setting or I added something, I got several places to do that. Look at allow establish and related is in here 4 times. Allow home to any is in here 4 times. So do I want to go manipulate 4? No, I want to create this once and be done. And this is part of the reason why I say, let's start over and do this from scratch, because I think you'll see we're going to go from like 20 rules back down to like 6 or maybe 4 even, depending on what your setup is. So we're going to go ahead and do that. You can delete all these rules very, very easily, all right? And I'm going to show you how to do that. Actually, you're already 90% of the way there if you're following along. So you go to the all policies. You can see 98 total. You go, and so just the custom ones are there. And then you can click manage. All right, that gives you the little boxes. If I click this top one up here, it highlights them all, and then I can hit remove. Okay, and I'm going to go ahead and do that. All right, this is going to be our new starting point. All right. So now we have no custom rules in place, and we're going to kind of start all over. All right. I hope I didn't lose you. But trust me, you'll see how much easier this is going to be by doing it this way. And it's one of the reasons I didn't publish this video right away. I wanted to find out a good way to teach you guys because I want this to be usable for you in the future. I've watched all the videos out there that you guys have watched, and they talk about all the great features, and you can do this, and you know, the allow return traffic thing was confusing before, and now it's not. All true, but nobody really showed you how to set up your rules. We're going to do that here next. All right, so one more little cleanup item that we need to do that I've already done, but I want to walk you through it here, is when we converted our firewall over to zone-based firewalls, and it created all those firewall rules for us, it also moved over our profiles that we set up previously. So now with the new zone-based firewall, these are called network objects. So if you come over into profiles and network objects, you're going to have all yours listed there. Now, I deleted mine, so I selected all, or I hit manage, selected them all, and deleted them because you'll see that we're going to use these a little bit differently in our zone-based firewall. So just as a cleanup item, might want to be a good idea to clean them up. If you don't, you don't. That's okay, but I like to just kind of make sure I pointed that out to you. All right, so we're going to go ahead and show you guys real quick that everything has access to everything right now, right? So we have no firewall rules in place. So our IoT network has a free access to our main network. So I'm just going to show you here, if I ping an IP address on the IoT network, I can get a reply, no problem. And if I am on that network and ping my default network, so ping 192.168.1.37, you can see I can ping that as well. So we don't have any firewall rules in place. If I was on the camera VLAN, I would be able to ping as well. So this is our starting point, guys. We're going to start all the way over. Now, the first thing I want to do is create some zones. All right, so let's go ahead and do that real quick. All right, so we'll go back over into security. We're on this main screen here. Now, one thing is I'm not going to use the internal zone that was created, okay? Now, I have my reasoning for it, but one thing is I can't even change the name. If I click on this, it doesn't let me change the name of it. I can change what networks are in it, but I really can't do anything with it. And to me, I like to be able to delete it or add it or change the name. I like the name to be based off of what my requirements are or what I feel that zone is doing. The internal zone, it's fine, but it's not what I want. So I'm going to go ahead for our example here, and this will work with all three of our scenarios. You probably already saw a little example of it when you were looking at my diagrams. I'm going to create two new zones. One's going to be called secure zone, and the other one's going to be called unsecure zone. So let's go ahead and create those real quick. So we're going to hit create zone. I'm going to come up here. This one's going to be secure zone. And we're going to put our default network in the secure zone. This is the network we want to protect. So we'll go ahead and hit add entry, hit proceed, and now we've created this secure zone here, okay? So I'm going to X out of that. We're going to go ahead and create one more. This one's going to be our unsecure zone. All right, we're going to put our camera and IoT network in that, okay? And again, this is the same for all three scenarios, okay? So don't feel like you got to not do this if you're in one of them. This is for all three. All right, now I need to make my camera screen just a little smaller so it all fits in there. Now, one big difference between using the internal zone that's built in, and as you can see, that's empty now. There's no networks tied to it, so we're just going to abandon it. Is that up here in the internal zone, there's a lot of green. It basically, by default, allows access to all these other zones, by default. However, when you create a new zone, it's a lot of red down here, guys. So by default, these zones block access to other zones. And I actually like that a little bit better because basically, when we create our rules, all we need to do is go in and just open the doors that we care about. And I think that makes this process a little bit easier, okay? So just to prove my point, I'll pull up my ping here and I'll try pinging the IoT network, which is now in this unsecure zone. And you can see I can't ping it anymore. And same goes for here. If they try and ping me, there's no talking back and forth. We've completely restricted that, okay? So we're going to change that. We're going to fix that. But by default, when you create these zones, there's a lot of red. It blocks it by default. Our unsecure zone, the camera network inside the unsecure zone and our IoT network can't talk to each other either. And let me show you where that says that. So we probably should talk about how to use this firewall matrix before we get into creating policies, okay? So the rows over here are your source. So this is, you're going to go to whichever row your traffic is coming from. And then you're going to go to whatever column that your traffic is going to, and then you'll click into that box. So for example, if I wanted to see why my IoT network can't talk to my camera network, that would be from the unsecure zone to the unsecure zone. That's this box. And when I click it, it says block all traffic. I mean, it says right there, we're not going to allow any traffic go through unless you create a rule that says otherwise, okay? So we're going to be creating some rules from the secure zone to the unsecure zone, and we're also going to be creating some rules from the unsecure zone to our gateway. This gateway column right here is what we were talking about, being able to allow for DNS, being able to allow our cameras to be able to function. Because if you look here in my devices, I have a G5 turret camera on my network that's green and talking and everything's happy, right? So right now, by default, if I go back into security here, you'll see that by default, even though it blocked all the other access, by default, the secure zone and unsecure zone, if I click into these boxes under gateway, they're all allow. So there's an allow all traffic. Right now, there's no restrictions between any networks in the unsecure zone or secure zone accessing the gateway. Well, that's great for the secure zone. That's what we want. We don't even have to change that rule. Everything is working the way we want it to. However, for the unsecure zone, we're going to have to back that off a little bit, and we're going to get into that when we create our policies. All right, so now we need to create some policies to kind of open up these doors or close some doors, but still allow us that functionality. So the slide I'm showing you right now is just a quick little summary of what we're actually going to build to make scenario 1 happen, okay? So we're going to create inside the secure zone to unsecure zone box in the matrix, we're going to allow our default network in the secure zone to access the unsecure zone. Remember, it can't do that right now after we created those zones. And we're going to allow it to access all networks, and then we're going to allow return traffic, okay? And I'm going to show you how easy that is in here, because it really is very easy in these new zone-based firewalls. And then we're going to go down and we're going to adjust the unsecure zone to our gateway zone, okay? Right now it's a free-for-all. Everything's got full access. So we want to restrict that and dial it down a little bit. Now we're going to allow the unsecure zone, that means all VLANs in it, to the gateway to access port 53. Remember, our gateway is doing our DNS. Next, we're going to block IoT to any gateway, okay? So basically, once we allow that port 53 through there for DNS, we can block all other access for the IoT network only. We can't do that for the cameras because the cameras need to be able to record. Remember, this is also our camera MVR. So then we're going to create a block camera to every gateway except the camera gateway rule, just like we did in video 6, if you guys did watch my previous firewall video in the course. And then we're going to block camera VLAN to its own gateway, but just on ports 22, 80, and 443, which are SSH, HTTP, HTTPS, okay? So that will allow the cameras to still record to their NVR, allow the NVR and the gateway to manage them with the Unifi Protect software, but it will not allow someone to actually directly access our gateway and log into it or something like that. Okay, so let's actually get into the config here and build this thing. So we're going to start this off, we're going to create that first policy, and this is going to be to allow our secure zone basically unlimited access to our unsecure zone. So let's go do that. And the way we're going to start this is we've got to get into the right box. So we're going to start the secure zone. We're going to go clear over here to the unsecure zone and click into that box. And then we're going to choose create policy. All right, now I'm a big fan of descriptive titles, guys, so try to use these. If you ever have to look back in your rules, it's going to help you if you know what the title says. So this is going to be allow the secure zone to unsecure zone any. So basically full access. And when we say unsecure zone, that means both the IoT network and the camera network because they are both in the unsecure zone. So by creating a zone-to-zone rule, it counts for all the VLANs in those zones. And that's one of the things that makes this really, really powerful, especially if you have a lot of VLANs and you have them, categorized correctly. So our source is going to be our secure zone. We're going to say any network in there, any device, anything in the secure zone. We only have one network, but we're going to just go ahead and just leave it that. On any port is allowed to talk to the unsecure zone. Now, this is that really cool thing. We don't have to do the allow established and related rules anymore. We can just check this box or make sure it's checked to say allow return traffic. And it'll automatically create a firewall rule for us that allows that to happen. That's a really, really cool thing and obviously much easier to understand. So then our destination is going to be our unsecure zone. All networks in it. We don't have to specifically pick one. All ports, all versions, all protocols, everything. We're just going to go ahead and say add policy. And when we do that, it allows that down there. So let's test it real quick. I like to test things as we go along, so we got to give it just a quick second here. I'll pull up the box. And I should be able to ping an IP address in the IoT network now. And as you can see, I can ping that. However, we are only allowing return traffic. You can see we got a reply. So that return traffic is working, which is great. However, when I go over into our other computer and try to ping us over here, sorry, darn auto window things. All right, so let's try and ping back. So we're going to ping a device on the default network. And as you can see, we still can't do that. That is blocked. We created that one-way security, which is great. That's exactly what we want to do. And we did it with a single rule. All right, so now that we got that created, we need to restrict our access from the unsecure zone to the gateway. Now let me kind of show you what we got going on right now. If I go into my device that is sitting on the IoT network and pull up a browser, I can go to 192.168.1.1 and get right to our gateway, okay? And I could do this if I went to 2.1 and 3.1, it would also work. It basically has unrestricted access to be able to do that. And the way I know that is because our unsecure zone, when I go over to gateway and click into that box, you can see it allows MDNS, which is great. We want the MDNS to work so we can control our devices, but it also says allow all traffic. We don't want to allow all traffic. We want to limit that access so it matches our diagram. So let's go in there and do that. So we're going to go ahead and create our first policy. So we're going to click on that. And this is going to be to allow DNS to work. We want the whole zone to talk to our gateway for DNS. So this is going to be allow unsecure zone to gateway zone DNS, okay? Now I'm putting the word zone in there. That's just for you guys. If I was doing this myself, I would say allow unsecure to gateway DNS. But I'm putting the word zone in there so you guys understand it's a whole zone rule, okay? So this is going to be from the entire zone, okay? So we don't have to choose a network. We're not going to pick a port. We'll actually pick the port down here. This is going to be an allow rule. Don't worry about that being grayed out. It'll tell you that because it's a gateway, it doesn't need to worry about it. And then we're going to go over to our gateway zone, all right? But this time, it's going to be a specific port. We don't want all the traffic. We want just DNS. Now, you can do that two different ways, right? We can create an object. Remember, we deleted all those out a little bit ago, so we could create a new one called DNS, but these new firewall rules actually give you the ability to use like this little drop down here. And especially when you only have a single port or a single gateway, this is actually pretty darn handy. So I'm going to choose specific, and I'm just going to go down here and choose DNS from the list. Works really well, okay? And then we don't need to set any of the specifics down here. We're just going to go ahead and say add policy. So now we've allowed unsecure zone to the gateway zone, but just on port 53, okay? Now, if you recall from our summary, the next thing we have to do is block the IoT network, just the IoT network inside that unsecure zone to all gateway. We want to restrict all access so that when we pull up that browser, and I show you here in just a second, that it can't get to the gateway anymore. So we're going to create another policy. We're going to go up here and give it a name. So this is going to be block IoT network to all gateway zone. Or actually, the better way of saying that is to gateway zone any, right? So any, but only the IoT network. So we need to come down here, and instead of just leaving this as any, we need to choose our network. So I'll click on network. I'm going to say just IoT. We're going to hit save. We're going to come down, and we're going to say block, which make sure that is, to the gateway zone, any IP, any zone, whatever, does not matter. Leave that all blank, or leave that all as it is, and there we have it. So now we have that block rule in place. So if I go back over into my device over here, let's close this tab. This time I'm going to go to 3.1, so 192.168.3.1, so one that we haven't pulled up. Oh, it did allow us to get over there. That's interesting. That's interesting. Are we on the right network still? Oh, I pulled up the wrong screen. All right, I pulled up the wrong screen. Here we go. This is the one we wanted. All right, so my bad, guys. So we're going to do 192.168.3.1. There we go. And as you can see, we're just spinning. So I pulled up the wrong browser. My bad on that. Sorry about that. Which means I did it wrong earlier too, but you get the gist, is that we were allowed and then we're not. So it would have worked when in my previous if I was on the proper screen, but regardless, now you can see we can't get to 3.1, we can't get to 2.1, but we can still get to the internet. So let's pull up that. Let's just go to verizon.com, right? And you can see we can still browse and, you know, go buy a new phone or whatever. So the internet's working. DNS is still working, but we just can't get to the gateway for anything else. All right, so that's part one. Now we have to tend to our camera VLAN, okay? And let's go control its access. So let's go down here, and we need to create a couple more policies. So the first policy, we're going to allow, or we're going to block the camera VLAN, or the camera network, from accessing all other gateways. So if you recall, we have 192.168.1.1, that's one gateway. 192.168.2.1, that's the IoT gateway, okay? So we need to block those two gateways. Guest network's covered, we don't have to worry about 99.1, and 3.1 is the camera gateway. So we're gonna block all other gateways except camera in this rule. So we're gonna name this block camera network to all gateways except cameras. All right, hopefully that makes sense to you guys. All right, so we'll go into the network. We're going to choose camera specifically. We're going to go down and say save. This is going to be a block action, and we need to block only IP address 1.1 and 2.1. Now again, we could create an object for this if we wanted to, but we're going to choose IP address, okay? We want to block IPs, and it'll let me add a couple here, which is great. This is how we're going to do it. Or I could go create an object called all gateways except camera, like we did before, and do it that way. So I'm just going to show you the new way because I think it's faster. I think it's easier to understand and everything. So we're going to go 192.168.1.1. All right, so we're going to add that IP address. That's one gateway. Then we're going to go 192.168.2.1, 2.1. All right, that's the IoT gateway. All right, and I told you we don't have to worry about 99.1 because that's covered. And so now we're going to block all of these. All right, and on any port, anything, we're just blocking access to those. So we'll go ahead and say add policy, and now you see that one added down there. Now we got to add one more because our camera network can still go to 192.168.3.1 and access the gateway screen that you were seeing there with the login. We don't want that to happen. That's done on port 443, port 80. We also don't want to allow SSH into our router as well. So we're going to go create one more policy. And this is going to be block camera network to its gateway SSH, HTTP, HTTPS, okay? So we're just gonna block those 3 ports. All right, so we need to choose our network. This is only gonna be the camera network, right? We've already done this for the IoT. This is a block rule, so we have that covered. This is going to be a gateway IP address, so we can actually just put 192.168.3.1. All right, we're gonna add that. But we're going to match some ports here. We need to match some ports. So this time, just to show you guys, we'll go ahead and do an object. I think it works easiest when you have multiple. So we're going to go ahead and just create a new object. And this object is going to be called SSH, HTTP, HTTPS. And we need to add those ports. So it's 22, add, 80, add, and 443. Add. So now we have a new object called SSH HTTP. So we're going to block access to this IP address. Great. On these ports, don't worry about the connection state, add policy, and now we're good to go. So if I was on the camera VLAN, I would no longer be able to get to 2.1, 1.1, or 3.1 and be able to pull up that web address like we had before. But if we go over into our cameras over here, you can see my camera G5 turret's still online. If I go over into my Unifi Protect, you can see that it is working too as soon as it opens, and it's recording my ceiling right now. So everything is working. We can still record. We can still have that functionality. This VLAN can still get to the internet and pull down updates and stuff like that. So we've accomplished our goals with scenario number 1. Now next, we're going to wipe all this out and do scenario number 2. You'll find that this is the easiest of all of them. We're going to do this in basically 2 rules. It's going to be pretty slick how that happens. So if you're curious about it, come on along. Or if that's what matches what you have at your house, come on along and we'll do that next. All right, so let's get these rules out of here so we can do scenario number 2. So we'll go ahead and just choose just the custom ones. We'll go ahead and hit manage. We're going to highlight them all. We're going to say remove. Yep. Okay, then we're going to go into our profiles, we're going to go into our network objects, we're going to manage, and we're going to remove. All right, now everything can talk to each other again. Everything's back to the way it was when we first converted the deal over. Now, one thing I am going to leave is I'm not going to recreate, well actually, yeah. So let's go ahead and just delete these 2. All right, so now everything is back to the way it was before we started scenario 1. Everything's back in the internal zone, and then we'll go ahead and just create everything from scratch. Now, real quick, let's talk about what we're going to be actually building here. So if we go over into our summary here, it's going to look a little cleaner, right? So we're going to basically create 3 rules. We're going to allow the default network in the secure zone to access any network in the unsecure zone. This is exactly the same we did in scenario 1. This is going to give access to the default network to talk to every network inside the unsecure zone and allow that return traffic just like we want. Then, because we don't have to worry about the camera thing anymore, we can basically create these rules for access and blocking at the zone level. Before we had to create individual ones because we were allowing DNS and we were allowing the cameras to talk to the gateway, but now we don't have to do that. Only DNS is being handled in the gateway zone. Our cameras and our MVR is in the camera network, which means they can talk to each other no matter what. We don't have to restrict that with firewall rules anymore. They can just all talk to each other because they're sitting in the same network. So we still need to restrict access. We need to allow DNS to the gateway, and then we can block everything else, kind of like what we did for IoT last time. So we're going to allow the unsecure zone to the gateway on port 53, allow for DNS so everything can get to the internet, and then we're going to block unsecure zone to any gateway, the whole zone this time, which is going to include IoT and camera. So let's go ahead and build this thing and see what it looks like. So the first thing we need to do is to create our zones and get our VLANs assigned to them. So we'll go ahead and do that real quick. So the first one's going to be called Secure Zone. All right, we'll add that, and that's going to be our default network. Add entry, proceed. Next, we're going to create a new zone. This is going to be our unsecure zone. We're going to, zone. All right, we're going to put IoT and camera in there. Add, proceed. All right, so now we have that. Everything's blocked because you can see all the reds back, okay? So we need to create basically 3 rules to accomplish what we're going to do. So the first one is going to be to allow the secure zone to talk to the unsecure zone, just like we did last time. But if you didn't watch that and you skipped ahead, basically we're going to use this matrix here to be able to allow the secure zone to talk to the unsecure zone, which you can see right now is blocked. And we're going to allow return traffic back so you can run your smart lights and stuff like that. So we're going to come down here to secure, go all over to unsecure and click into that box. That's where this policy is going to take place. And you can see block all traffic is in there right now. So we're going to click create policy. Now I'll mention this over and over again, but I like my policy names or my firewall rules to have specific names. We want to know what this thing is doing. So these names will be very descriptive, and I encourage you to do the same thing on your end. So we're going to allow the secure zone, which includes all the VLANs in it, even though that's only one, to the unsecure zone, any, right? So any can talk to any, right? I want to make sure we do this, but it's one way, okay? One way. So we have our secure zone. We're going to say any network in there is allowed to talk to the unsecure zone, and we are going to allow for return traffic. This is one of the things they did in zone-based firewalls that's made this very, very easy, okay? So we're just going to make sure that's checked so it allows that return traffic, and we're going to basically leave everything down here alone. We're going to say, I want my default to talk to anything in the unsecure zone. So we're going to go ahead and say add policy, and we'll give it a quick second here. I'll close this, and let's do our ping test. So we'll pull this up, hit up, and we'll go 2.116, and you can see I can ping it, which is great. Now let's see if I can ping back. So here is my, whoops, I didn't mean to do that. So let's see if we can ping 1.37, and we can't. So one-way traffic. My main default network can ping my IoT, but my IoT cannot ping my default. That's exactly what we wanted, okay? And because we got those replies, we know that the return traffic is allowed. That's great. If it wasn't, it wouldn't have worked, okay? So now let's minimize this, All right, so now we've allowed that. Now we need to go restrict access to our gateway. So if we go down to our unsecure zone and go over into our gateway policies and we click in there, you can see allow, right? It's allowing everything. It's allowing MDNS, which is good. We want MDNS to traffic to go through so we can discover those devices and things. But it's allowing all traffic, which means that if you are on this network, on the IoT network, and you go to 192.168.1.1, even though that is a IP address from the default IP scheme, we can get there. We can pull right up and get there, even though, you know, we've blocked access to the IoT network or to the default network from the IoT, right? This is because we're allowing access to the gateway. So this is what we need to block. So let's go do that. And so, but we need to allow for DNS. If you recall from the summary page, our gateway is still doing our DNS in scenario number 2. So we need to allow DNS, and then we're going to block everything else. So we'll create a policy. We're going to basically say allow unsecure zone to gateway zone DNS. Okay? We're only going to allow that. Unsecure zone, any network in the unsecure zone, that's fine. We need to allow, and then we need to pick our port. So we're going to come down here to the gateway destination. Now we can pick any IP, we don't care, but we need a specific port. So we can do this a couple ways. I can create an object. If I do that, it'll allow me to go create an object called DNS and put a port in there, 53. Or something that's really nice with this new zone-based firewall, and again, I kind of talked about this in the last scenario, is you can say specific, and I could put 53 right here, and that would work, or I can just go choose DNS from the list, which is really super handy. Okay, so we don't care about any of this other stuff, and we'll just go ahead and add that. So now we are allowing port 53 traffic to our gateway, which doesn't really matter right now because we're allowing all traffic. So now we need to add our block rule to block all the rest of the ports. So we'll go create one more policy. This is going to be a block rule. Okay, block unsecure zone to gateway zone any. All right, unsecure zone any, block any, done. Proceed. So now we're allowing port 53, blocking everything else. And that's it, right? Our cameras we don't have to worry about because they are recording to a device that's sitting inside their own VLAN. So we only have to allow this port 53 to allow internet traffic to work. So let's make sure we still have internet access over there. So we'll go back to our remote computer over here, pull up a new tab, and we'll go to, I don't know, I've been doing Disney.com. Okay, so yep, Disney's working. So we got internet access, which is good. That's what we wanted. And now let's see, I'm going to close this out. Let's see if we can get to one of our gateways. So 192.168. And I'm going to go to my own gateway. Let's see if that works. Can't even get to it. Can I ping it? Ping 192.168.2.1. Can't even ping it. All right, so our internet's working, which is, you know, handled by our gateway, and we can't get anywhere else. This would be exactly the same for our camera gateway, and we did this in 3 rules. I mean, really, really easy. I think it's really cool that that works that slick like that. Pretty darn neat. And so that is all there is, she wrote, for that. Now, you can see why I'm doing this in a way where we deleted out all our other rules. Instead of editing 20 different rules to make this happen, we did the same thing with 3 rules. So to me, hopefully this is, you know, portrayed that this is the easier way of doing it. So now let's go jump over into scenario number 3, where we remove DNS from our gateway, but we're going to actually just kind of move it over into our secure zone, and we're just going to have to tweak a couple rules here. You'll see this is also very easy to set up. All right, guys, so now let's go into scenario number 3, and let me show you a summary of the rules that we're going to be creating for this. So if we go down in here, we are going to, again, create that allow rule to allow the default network in our secure zone to access everything in the unsecure zone, just like we did before. Okay, so that's going to be still the same. What's going to be changed just a little bit is this unsecure zone to the gateway, and then we also have to allow DNS traffic to our secure zone. So we are going to create an allow rule to allow our unsecure zone, both of them, the camera and the IoT network, to access port 53 in our secure zone. Instead of our gateway, it's going to be in our secure zone. And we're going to say a specific IP address, because if you recall, we have a fake Pi-hole device in there that was 1.55. So we're going to even say not give access to the whole zone. We're only going to give access to a single IP address on port 53. And then we're going to block everything to the gateway. Everything. We don't need to get to the gateway anymore. We don't need access. We're getting our DNS from our Pi-hole, and the cameras are in their own network, and so everything should just work when we're done. So let's go ahead and get that done here. So we'll go into here. I'm going to clear everything out so we can do that. So first thing we'll do is go access our, I'm going to click all policies, okay, custom. So there's the 3 we built. Manage, remove, done. Okay, I'm going to access our zones here. Let's remove those. Done. Now it's moved everything back up into there. I don't believe we created any network objects. Nope, those are empty. So now we are back to square one here, and let's work on scenario number 3. All right, guys, so if you're watching this all the way through, I apologize for any repeating, but I know there's people who are just skipping to the parts that they want to watch, and so I need to make sure I cover everything for them. I don't want to force everybody to watch it straight through. So sorry about the little bit of repetition, but we're going to go ahead and cover this again. Now, as you can see, in our matrix down here, right? Lots of green. Our networks are in the internal zone that's created. We're going to abandon that. If you recall from the diagram I showed you, we create two new zones in there. One is going to be called secure zone and the other one is going to be called unsecure zone, okay? And that's what's going to allow these rules to be kind of created as a one-to-many or many-to-many. All right, so let's go ahead and create our zone first. We're going to go up here and create one called secure zone. All right, and we're going to select our networks. This is going to be our default. This will move it out of the internal zone and put it into the secure zone. All right, let's go ahead and create one more. This is going to be our unsecure zone. All right, IoT and camera. All right, proceed. All right, so now our internal is abandoned. We're not going to use it. I can't delete it, so we're just going to kind of leave it where it is. And now we have these two new zones to work with. And you can see down below in our cable matrix or firewall matrix that everything is blocked, right? Lots of limited access, which again, this is great. This is what we want. We want the limited access. So just to show you right now, if I go on my main network here, and I try to ping a device on my IoT network, I can't do it, right? So it cannot ping that network at all, okay? Now, if I go onto my computer on the IoT network and try to ping something on the default network, okay, so let's try and ping 1.37, which is my main computer, I can't ping it at all. And the reason for that is because of this cable or this firewall matrix. I don't know why I keep calling it a cable matrix. If we use the way you use this is our source. So the row is our source and the destination is our column. So if we go from secure zone over to unsecure zone, and click in that box, you can see block all traffic. It can't get there. Same thing with unsecure zone to secure zone. It's blocked. That's why those pings are not working. I'll even take it a step further. In unsecure zone to unsecure zone. So from camera network to IoT network, blocked. Everything's blocked. Those two are blocked by default just by creating these two new zones. I love that because now we can just have to go in and open the doors that we need in just a few rules. All right, so the first rule we want to create is to allow our secure zone to talk to our unsecure zone. We want that access so our laptops, our cell phones, or whatever can control our other devices and get into things that we want to. It needs to have full access. So we're going to go down to the secure zone. This is our source, and we're going to go all the way over to unsecure, click into that box, and we're going to create a policy. All right, now guys, I'm a broken record on this. Make sure your policy names, also known as firewall names, have descriptive names, right? We want to know what it's doing before we even click into it. So this is going to be allow secure zone. This is the whole zone. If we had more VLANs in the secure zone other than default, it would include all of them, okay? That's okay. To unsecure zone. Again, all the VLANs in the unsecure zone, any. So we're going to basically say our secure zone has unrestricted access to our unsecure zone. So we're going to go down here. We don't need to specify a network, a port, nothing. We need to say allow, right? This is an allow rule. And this magic little checkbox here pops up that says allow return traffic. We absolutely want that because if you're on the IoT network, you want to be able to open up the app for your smart devices, hit the button to turn it on or off, and then have the app reflect that it's on or off, right? That's a two-way communication. And then our destination is anything in the unsecure zone. We don't have to pick anything in here, so we can just go ahead and say add policy. All right, so we're going to give it just a second. These do take a second, maybe 3 seconds or so. Now let's go back and try and ping our IoT network again. And as you can see, we are getting a reply. This is great. This is what we want. This is exactly what we want. So now let's go over into our IoT network and try to ping our main network, our secure zone or our default network. So I'm going to ping my IP, and as you can see, it does not work. So we have that one-way communication that we were talking about in the beginning of this video. All right, so now that we got that working, we need to work on our access to DNS, and we need to block all access to our zones, or to our gateway, okay? Now, I won't have any way of testing this. As a matter of fact, it's going to break mine because I don't have a pie hole. So understand that this is all just in theory, but I wanted to show you what rules you need to create. But it will break on my side because I don't have a pie hole that's sitting in my default network that has an IP address of 1.55. It doesn't exist. So therefore, when I say that that device only is handling my DNS, and it doesn't exist, it's going to break my access to be able to get to the internet on the IoT network. So I am going to break mine, but I want to show you this scenario because you guys might have pie holes and it won't be the case for you because you actually have one. So let's go ahead and do that. So we're going to create a policy from the unsecure zone to the secure zone, right? This is where our pie hole is sitting, right? So we're going to go down here, we're going to create a policy, and we're going to go, and this is going to be allow unsecure zone to secure zone. Actually, I'm going to say to pie hole DNS, okay? So we're basically, because we're limiting it to one IP address, that's why I changed that to pie hole. So any device in this unsecure zone, we're going to allow, okay? We'll go ahead and allow this return traffic, okay, to our secure zone, but a specific IP. We don't want everything. 192.168.1.55, okay? That is the only IP address that we're allowing access to, and we're only going to allow access to on a specific port, and that is 53. So we'll go down, we'll choose 53, and we're going to go ahead and add the policy. Now, that alone will break my internet. It should break here shortly, and I'll make it so my computers can't get to the internet anymore because they are no longer going to the gateway for DNS. Actually, I take that back. It won't break because if I go into my system, or excuse me, my networks, and go into the IoT network, and go clear down in here into the advanced options, DNS server is set to auto. So I would also have to go in here to set this to 192.168.1.55. So I'm not going to do this, but just understand that right now my IoT network and my camera network are still going to be talking to my gateway for their DNS because I don't have this DNS set to my fake pie hole, okay? So I'm just going to leave that as auto. I just want to point that out. So everything actually still works, but I'm not actually creating any rules that I can enforce. I just want to show you how to do it, okay? So this is kind of in theory here. All right, so let's go back over in here. Now we want to block access to our gateway. And when we do this, we will take the internet down for this whole zone because it won't be able to get to DNS anymore. So, but we need to do it, right? This is part of it. We're going to allow access to the DNS server, and we're going to block all access to our gateway. So we go unsecure zone to our gateway. Right now it's allow everything. We're just going to create a policy that says block unsecure zone to gateway zone any. Okay? So everything from the unsecure zone, we're going to block it to the gateway zone, any IP, anything, and we're going to block it. That should wreck my internet access because it will no longer be able to get to the internet or the gateway to be able to resolve websites. But that's it. That's the only thing we need to set to make this happen. And you can see, guys, why we removed all the rules out. Even though it seemed a little bit counterintuitive, we removed those rules because this is much simpler. Instead of manipulating 20 different rules or 4 different rules to make one change, we could go in and actually just kind of clean this up a little bit. But you got to have a pretty good understanding about the zone-based firewall and just generally how it works for this to work. All right, so that's our 3 scenarios. Let's go ahead and wrap things up. All right, so what do you guys think of the new zone-based firewall? Do you guys like it better? Is it worse? Is it harder to understand? Maybe you guys don't know because you haven't played with it enough, but leave comments down below and let me know what you think of it. And hopefully this video was helpful. Hopefully it created some general simple scenarios that you guys could take and manipulate to fit your own setting. I really appreciate you coming along with this journey. Again, we're going to continue to add to the Unifi for Newbies because you guys have spoken up and I have listened, and I want to make sure we continue to put out that content for you guys so you guys can continue to build your great networks. So look for those more videos in the future. I do know we're going to be tackling the alarms in Unifi Protect in our Unifi for Newbies series as well. So be looking for that. Please like or subscribe if that's interesting to you. And we'll see you guys down the road in a future video. Thanks.